He didn't knock on the towering gates of Rothenburg Castle to sell flowers or beg for coin. 7-year-old Cole Dillard came seeking something far more dangerous, the legendary moon petal, a cure that grew only in the Vampire King's forbidden garden. But when the ancient iron doors groaned open and the small boy stepped into the candlelit hall, he saw something that turned his blood to ice. A massive portrait dominated the stone wall. A woman in a crown-like circlet, regal and untouchable. It was his mother's face. "Why is my mom's photo in your house?" Cole asked Lord Augustus Rothenburg, the immortal king who had ruled for 3 centuries. What came next wasn't words at all. The Vampire King's pale lips parted, then stopped. His dark eyes widened. For the first time in 300 years, Augustus forgot how to speak. The last light of day had already bled from the sky above Rothenburg when Cole began his journey through the Shadow Vale woods. The path to the castle was one even grown men avoided. But he was only 7 years old, and his legs already trembled from exhaustion. His worn boots were soaked through from crossing the frozen morning creek, and he hadn't eaten since the morning his mother, Anaya Hull, had collapsed. He didn't cry. He didn't turn back. Every painful step through the thorned underbrush was for her. For the woman now dying in their one-room cottage, her skin burning with the mysterious blight no village healer could name or cure. Cole's breath misted in the cold air as he walked through the fog-choked streets of Ashencross, the village that clung to the shadow of Rothenburg Keep like a frightened child. The cobblestones beneath his feet were slick with frost, and the narrow houses on either side leaned inward as if trying to hide from the castle that loomed above them all. No one walked these streets after sunset. No one but him. His satchel bumped against his hip with every step, filled with the small wooden toys he'd carved over the past month. Horses with delicate legs, birds with outstretched wings, a tiny knight with a sword no thicker than a needle. His father had been the best toy maker in 3 provinces before the sickness took him. Now Cole carried on the craft, his small hands remembering what his father had taught him. The keep's outer wall rose from the mist like the skeleton of some ancient giant. Cole's fingers trembled as he reached for the iron bell beside the gate. It rang out clear and cold, echoing against stone that had stood for centuries. Silence stretched. Then came a voice like winter thunder rolling down from the mountains. "Who disturbs the threshold of Rothenburg?" Cole's throat tightened, but he forced the words out. "My name is Cole Dillard, my lord. I've come to sell toys." The gate opened without a sound, revealing a courtyard lit by torches that burned with pale blue flame. And there, descending the marble steps, was Lord Augustus Rothenburg himself. Cole had heard the stories all his life, but nothing prepared him for the reality. The Vampire King moved like winter moonlight given form, his platinum hair flowing past his shoulders, held back by a crown of silver that caught the torchlight and threw it back in fractured stars. His ceremonial robes were white as new snow, trimmed with gold thread that formed patterns too complex for mortal weavers. His face was ageless, beautiful in the way that glaciers are beautiful, cold, eternal, and utterly inhuman. "Toys," Augustus said, and his voice was softer now, almost curious. "Show me." Cole's hands shook as he opened his satchel. The Vampire King actually knelt, and lifted each carved figure with unexpected gentleness, turning them in his pale fingers. For a long moment, he said nothing. "Your father's work," Augustus finally murmured. "I recognize the style. He sold to the castle once, many years ago." His silver eyes lifted to Cole's face. "You have his gift." "He's dead, my lord, And my mother is sick. I need— Come inside. Augustus rose in one fluid motion. I will buy them all, and you will eat before you return to the cold. The great hall blazed with candlelight, warm and golden, so different from the blue flames outside. Cole barely noticed the food a servant brought: bread, cheese, dried fruit. His eyes had locked onto the far wall. A portrait gallery stretched the length of the hall, frame after frame of faces from centuries past. But one painting made his heart stop. A woman in a crown-like circlet, regal, untouchable. His mother's face. The wooden horse clattered to the marble floor, and for the first time in 3 centuries, Lord Augustus Rothenburg felt the ground shift beneath his feet. That's my mama, Cole whispered, pointing at the portrait with a trembling finger. Why do you have her picture? The words hit Augustus like iron stakes through the chest. His silver eyes went wide, his perfect composure cracking like ice under spring sun. He stared at the boy, really looked at him for the first time, and saw it. The shape of the jaw, the curve of the mouth, the eyes that held flecks of gold even in candlelight. Come with me, Augustus said, and his voice was no longer steady. Now. He led Cole through corridors lined with tapestries older than kingdoms, up a spiral stair that seemed to climb forever, to a private study where no servant was permitted entry. The room was smaller than Cole expected, filled with books and star charts and a single desk carved from black wood. Augustus moved to the window, his back rigid, his hands gripping the stone sill. Tell me about her, he commanded, then softer. Please. Her name is Anaya Hull, Cole began, confused by the desperation in the vampire king's voice. She's a seamstress in Millbrook, 3 days north. She makes beautiful things, dresses for weddings, christening gowns, but she doesn't remember anything from before 7 years ago. She says it's like waking up in the middle of a story, not knowing how it started. Augustus turned slowly. His face was too pale, even for one of the undead. Nothing? She has nightmares sometimes. She wakes up screaming about shadows and chains and someone calling her name. But when I ask her about it in the morning, she can't remember the dreams either. Cole's small hands clenched into fists. The healers say it's trauma, that something terrible happened to her and her mind locked it away. Anaya. Augustus breathed the name like a prayer. He crossed to a locked cabinet, his movements mechanical, and withdrew a leather-bound journal. The pages fell open to a sketch, the same woman from the portrait, but laughing this time, her hair loose around her shoulders. 10 years ago, I loved a mortal woman. I commissioned that portrait as a betrothal gift. I was going to make her my queen. Consequences be damned. His voice cracked on the last word. But she vanished the night before our wedding. No note, no explanation. I searched for months, years. I thought she'd abandoned me. That she'd realized what I was and couldn't bear it. He looked at Cole with ancient eyes and was suddenly made human by grief. I would have given her everything. My kingdom, my immortality, my very soul. She didn't leave you? Cole whispered. Someone took her memories. The words hung in the air like frost. Then came the sound of shattering glass. A raven burst through the stained window in an explosion of colored shards, black wings beating frantically. It dropped a scroll sealed with dark red wax. Blood, not wax, onto the desk and fled back into the night. Augustus's hand shook as he broke the seal. His face went from pale to ashen. What is it? Cole asked. A message from the council, Augustus said, his voice hollow. They know you're here. The archives of night lay 3 levels below the earth, carved into living rock that remembered centuries. Augustus descended the spiral stairs with Cole following close behind, the torches along the walls igniting spontaneously as the vampire king passed. The air grew colder with each step, and Cole's breath came out in thick clouds. The archive doors were bronze, engraved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Augustus pressed his palm flat against the metal, and the doors groaned open, releasing the scent of old parchment and forgotten time. Inside, shelves stretched into darkness. Augustus moved with purpose to a locked cabinet and withdrew a bundle wrapped in black silk. His hands were gentle as he unfolded it, revealing letters written in elegant script on cream-colored paper. I wrote to her every day for 3 months before I dared to speak to her face, Augustus said quietly. She was working in the castle as a seamstress then, brought in to repair the ceremonial banners. I watched her from the shadows, convinced she could never love something like me. Cole stepped closer, drawn by the raw pain in the vampire king's voice. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small iron compass, its surface scratched and worn. Mama carries this everywhere. She doesn't know why. She said she woke up with it 7 years ago, clutched in her hand so tight it left marks. Augustus took the compass with shaking fingers. He opened it, and inside the lid was an inscription. To find your way back to me, always. I gave this to her the night I proposed, he whispered. They moved deeper into the archives, past rows of historical records and battle chronicles to a vault sealed with 3 separate locks. Augustus worked them open one by one, and the door swung inward to reveal a chamber lit by phosphorescent crystals. At its center stood a pedestal holding a single book, its pages edged in gold. The prophecy of the Dawnborn, Augustus said, a child born of mortal and immortal blood who carries 3 marks that prove their nature. Cole watched as Augustus carefully opened the shutters of a high window. A single beam of late afternoon sunlight lanced through the gap, deadly to any vampire. Augustus held out his hand to stop the boy, but Cole had already stepped forward. The light touched his skin. He didn't burn. Augustus's breath caught. With trembling hands, he removed a silver ring from his finger and pressed it into Cole's palm. The metal sat there, warm and harmless, while the ancient prophecy text stated clearly that silver would burn any creature with vampire blood. Touch the stone, Augustus commanded, gesturing to the wall. Cole placed his small hand against the cold granite. Heat bloomed from the point of contact, spreading outward in visible waves, bringing warmth back to stone that had been frozen for decades. The ice crystals in the corners of the vault began to weep. Augustus fell to his knees before the child. You're not just her son, he said, and his voice broke completely. You're mine as well. You're the child we should have had together. The child someone made sure we could never raise. A commotion erupted above them, shouting, the clash of steel. They raced back up the stairs to find guards restraining a cloaked figure. Ravens fluttering frantically in a cage beside him. One of the guards held up a half-written message, the ink still wet. The Dawnborn child lives. He is in Rothenburg. Send the executioners. Augustus read the signature at the bottom, and his face became a mask of cold fury. Valentini. The moon had climbed higher, and with it came the certainty that time was running out. Augustus stood before the massive portrait of Anaya. His jaw clenched so tight, Cole could hear his teeth grinding together. We have to hide it, Augustus said. If the council sees this, they'll know immediately what you are to me. He reached up to lift the heavy frame from its hooks, but the ornate corner caught on the stone wall. The gilded edge sliced across his palm, deep enough that blood welled up instantly. Dark crimson, almost black. The blood of an immortal who had lived for centuries. The drops fell before Augustus could stop them, splashing directly onto Cole's upturned hand. The boy gasped, expecting pain, expecting the burn that vampire blood was supposed to inflict on mortal flesh. But instead, the blood began to glow. Silver light spread from each drop, tracing lines across his palm that connected and spiraled until they formed a perfect compass star, pulsing with soft radiance. Augustus stared, his wounded hand forgotten. The blood bond, he breathed. It only forms between parent and child of the same bloodline. You cannot fake this. You cannot forge it. The study doors burst open. Steward Vasilis stumbled in, his normally composed face streaked with sweat and terror. He was an older vampire, one who had served the Rothenburg line for 200 years, and Cole had never seen him look anything but calm. "My lord," Vasilis gasped. "I must confess, I should have told you years ago, but I was afraid." "Speak plainly," Augustus commanded. "Lord Valentini gave the order personally to erase Lady Anaya's memories." The words tumbled out of Vasilis like water breaking through a dam. "I overheard him that night, 10 years ago, speaking to the enforcers. He said the prophecy could not be allowed to manifest, that if you married a mortal and produced an heir, the old laws would crumble. The council would lose its power to rule through fear." Augustus's hand clenched into a fist, blood still dripping from his palm. "You've known this for a decade." "They've been watching the boy since birth, my lord. Waiting for him to show signs of power, waiting for the right moment to eliminate him before he could claim his birthright. I wanted to tell you, but Valentini threatened to destroy every vampire in your bloodline if I spoke. I thought if I kept silent, at least you would survive." "Where is Anaya now?" Augustus's voice was deadly quiet. "Still in Millbrook, my lord. I can have riders there by dawn." "Send them now. Bring her here under full guard. If the council wants my family, they'll have to come through me first." Vasilis bowed and fled. Augustus turned to Cole, the silver compass star still glowing on the boy's palm. He knelt and placed his uninjured hand over the mark. "I will not lose you again. Either of you. I swear it on my crown and my blood." The explosion came without warning. The outer gate erupted in a column of fire and smoke that shook the entire fortress. Alarm bells began to ring, their frantic clamor splitting the night. Through the shattered study window, Cole could see figures in dark armor pouring through the breach, their weapons gleaming with silver edges. The council had arrived early, and they had brought an army. Steel rang against steel in the courtyard below, and the night erupted with battle cries and the screams of the dying. Augustus pulled Cole behind him, his ceremonial white robes already stained with ash and blood from the explosion. Through the shattered windows, the boy could see vampire guards in Rothenburg colors fighting desperately against armored figures whose weapons burned with silver fire. "Stay close to me," Augustus commanded, and for the first time, Cole heard genuine fear in the vampire king's voice. Not fear for himself, but fear for what might happen if he failed to protect his son. They descended the main staircase at a run. A council enforcer burst through a side door, silver blade raised. But Augustus moved faster than mortal eyes could follow. The attacker crumpled without a sound, and they kept moving. More guards converged on them, Augustus's own forces forming a protective wedge around the boy as they fought their way to the great hall. The message was brutally clear. Valentini would take the child by force, and he didn't care how many had to die to make it happen. They reached the great hall's entrance just as another wave of attackers pressed forward. Augustus turned, his silver crown blazing in the firelight, and his voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. "I invoke the ancient right," he roared. "Trial by blood. By the oldest laws of our kind, I demand judgment before the full assembly." The words carried power that transcended mere sound. The attacking forces hesitated, confusion rippling through their ranks. Even among vampires who fed on fear and violence, there were laws older than kingdoms, and the trial by blood was sacred. To ignore it was to invite the wrath of forces that predated the council itself. Within the hour, the great hall had been transformed. Servants worked with frantic precision, moving furniture and unrolling tapestries that bore witness seals from every vampire house in the realm. Nobles arrived through secret passages, summoned by emergency protocols that hadn't been used in 300 years. Scholars came carrying ancient texts. Warriors stood at attention along the walls, their allegiance uncertain, but their presence required. The portrait of Aeneas was moved to a place of honor above the dais, her painted eyes looking down on the gathering with queenly grace. Coley stood beside Augustus on the raised platform, the silver compass star on his palm hidden beneath a glove, but still warm against his skin. The assembly grew quiet as the massive doors at the hall's far end swung open. Kurt Valentini entered like winter itself taking human form. He was tall, taller even than Augustus, with sharp features that might have been handsome if they weren't so cold. His robes were black as a moonless night, trimmed with silver thread that formed patterns of chains and locks. Council guards flanked him on either side, their faces hidden behind masks of polished obsidian. He walked the length of the hall with measured steps, his eyes fixed on the small boy standing beside the vampire king. When he reached the dais, he smiled. It was the smile of a predator who had already won. The trial by blood required preparation that took precious minutes. Ancient candles were lit in a perfect circle around the dais, their flames burning blue-white and cold. A silver chalice was placed at the center, filled with water drawn from a spring that had never seen sunlight. The gathered witnesses formed ranks on either side, their silence heavy with expectation. Valentini stood opposite Augustus, his black robes making him look like a tear in the fabric of reality itself. His expression was one of patient contempt, as if this entire proceeding was merely a formality before he claimed what he'd come for. "The trial by blood is invoked," Augustus declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "Under these ancient laws, any lie spoken will burn the speaker from within, as silver burns our flesh. There is no deception here, only truth." He placed his hand over the chalice, and the water began to glow with pale light. "I present before this assembly Cole Dillard, son of Aeneas Hull, and my own blood. He is the dawn-born child of prophecy, and I claim him as my heir." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Valentini's smile widened. "An abomination," he said smoothly. "A violation of every law that separates our kind from mortals. The boy is a threat to the natural order. Surrender him to the council for judgment, Augustus, and this matter ends peacefully." "No," said a small voice. Every eye turned to Cole. The 7-year-old stepped forward, his chin raised, his hands steady despite the terror Valentini's presence inspired. "You're not afraid of what I am," Cole said clearly. "You're afraid of what I mean." That you can't control everything anymore. That things are changing, and you can't stop them. Valentini's composure cracked for just an instant, a flash of genuine anger crossing his features. "Place your hand on the chalice, Lord Valentini," Augustus commanded, "and answer me under oath. Did you order the abduction and memory erasure of Ania Hull 10 years ago?" Valentini's jaw clenched, but he had no choice. To refuse would prove his guilt as surely as any confession. He placed his hand over the glowing water. "I did what was necessary to preserve the order that has kept our kind strong for millennia." "That's not an answer to the question," Augustus pressed. "Did you give the order?" Valentini's face contorted. The water in the chalice began to boil. "Yes." The word came out like broken glass. Steward Vasilis stepped forward from the crowd, his voice shaking but clear. "I witnessed the order given. Lord Valentini commanded the enforcers to take Lady Anaya on the night before her wedding, to erase her memories and hide the child she carried. He feared the prophecy that a dawn-born heir would unite mortal and immortal realms and end the council's absolute authority." Valentini's eyes blazed with cold fury. He raised his hand, and compulsion magic rippled outward. Ancient power meant to silence witnesses, to bend minds and rewrite thoughts. The air itself seemed to thicken with his will. The compass star on Cole's palm erupted with silver light. The compulsion shattered like glass, striking stone, fragments of magical energy dissipating harmlessly. Several of the assembled nobles gasped. Even vampires who had lived for centuries had never seen a child, a half-mortal child, break a master vampire's compulsion so completely. The court's mood shifted like wind changing direction. Whispers spread through the ranks, nobles exchanging glances that said everything. If the boy can do this now, what will he become? The great doors opened with a sound like thunder. Anaya Hull stood in the entrance, flanked by royal guards in Augustus's colors. She wore a simple traveling cloak, her hair windswept, her face pale with exhaustion from the desperate ride. But when her eyes found her son standing on the dais, relief and terror warred across her features. Then her gaze lifted to the portrait above the throne, and to the vampire king who stared at her as if she were salvation itself. Ania stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes locked on the portrait that hung above the dais. Her lips moved soundlessly, forming words that wouldn't come. One trembling hand rose to her chest, fingers pressing against her heart as if trying to hold something inside that threatened to break free. "Mama!" Cole broke from Augustus's side and ran to her, his small arms wrapping around her waist. She collapsed to her knees, pulling him close, her whole body shaking. "Cole, what is this place? Why did they bring me here? I don't understand." "You will." Valentini's voice cut through the moment like a blade. He stepped forward, his hand rising with deliberate grace, fingers moving in patterns that left trails of shadow in the air. "Sleep now, Ania Hull. Return to the fog. Forget what you see here." "Forget." Cole tore away from his mother and positioned himself between them, his small frame utterly dwarfed by Valentini's towering presence. The compass star on his palm blazed through the glove, burning the fabric away, silver light pouring forth like liquid dawn. The compulsion magic struck the light and shattered. But this time, something else broke with it. Ania screamed. It wasn't pain. It was recognition, sudden and violent, like waking from a nightmare only to discover the nightmare was forgetting. Her hands flew to her head, and her eyes went wide with remembered terror and joy and 10 years of stolen life flooding back all at once. She saw it all in fragments that assembled themselves into terrible truth. A hidden garden bathed in moonlight. Augustus kneeling before her with an iron compass in his palm. His voice soft with wonder. I never believed I could love until I met you. Say yes, and I will spend eternity proving myself worthy. Her own voice laughing through tears. Yes, yes, always yes. Then, darkness. Hands grabbing her from behind on the night before the wedding. A voice she now recognized, Valentini's voice. Cold and clinical. The prophecy cannot be allowed to manifest. Take her, break her mind, but leave her alive. Let her raise the child in ignorance, away from protection. When he manifests his power, we'll harvest what we need and dispose of what remains. Waking in a stranger's cottage, her mind blank, her body heavy with pregnancy she couldn't explain. The instinct to protect the child inside her was all that remained. A mother's love that not even memory erasure could destroy. Ania rose on unsteady legs, her eyes now burning with fury that had been building for 7 stolen years. She turned to face Valentini, and her voice was steady as stone. You took everything from me, my memories, my love. 7 years of my son's life that I experienced as a stranger in my own mind. She walked forward, past the protective circle of guards, past Augustus, who reached for her but didn't stop her. You made me forget the man I loved and turned my own child into a mystery I couldn't solve. Valentini's hand was still on the chalice, the trial by blood still active. When he tried to speak, to deflect with political language and justifications, his throat seized. The water in the chalice turned black. He gasped, and smoke rose from his lips as if the lies were burning him from the inside. Under oath, Augustus said quietly, dangerously. Did you plan to kill the child once his power manifested? Valentini's face contorted with rage and pain. The truth forced itself out through clenched teeth. Yes. The assembled nobles recoiled. Even among vampires accustomed to ruthless politics, there were lines that couldn't be crossed. Valentini's hand went to his belt and drew a blade that seemed to drink the light around it. Cursed silver, etched with runes that promised death to any creature with vampire blood. His eyes locked on Cole. Then I'll finish it now. Valentini moved with the speed of a creature who had hunted for centuries. The cursed blade screamed through the air toward Cole's heart, its edge promising an end to prophecy and hope alike. Cole didn't think. He didn't plan. He simply felt the terror and love and desperate need to survive surge through him. And the fortress responded. The stone walls blazed with golden warmth, heat radiating from ancient rock that hadn't known true light in 300 years. Defensive wards that had been carved into the foundation when Rothenburg Keep was first built roared to life, their magic recognizing the dawn-born air they'd been waiting centuries to protect. Shadows peeled away from the walls and solidified into crystalline shields that formed a barrier around the boy. The cursed blade struck the shadow shield and rebounded with a sound like a bell cracking. Valentini snarled in frustration and changed targets. If he couldn't kill the child, he would destroy the father. He launched himself at Augustus with lethal intent, the blade seeking the vampire king's throat. What followed was battle, as only immortals could wage it. Too fast for mortal eyes to properly track, movement and counter-movement flowing like deadly dance. Augustus fought with the precision of 3 centuries of experience, But Valentini fought with the desperation of someone who had already lost everything and had nothing left to fear. They crashed through furniture that had stood for generations. They shattered windows and cracked marble pillars. Augustus's white robes bloomed with dark stains where the cursed blade found its mark. But he didn't slow. He couldn't. His son was watching. His family needed him to be more than a king. They needed him to be a father who would never stop fighting. Finally, inevitably, Augustus's superior skill won out. He caught Valentini's wrist mid-strike, twisted with brutal efficiency, and sent the cursed blade skittering across the floor. A heartbeat later, Augustus had his own sword, pulled from a fallen guard, pressed against Valentini's throat. The assembled nobles held their breath. By ancient law, Augustus had the right. By the trial's judgment, he had the justification. One stroke, and the threat would end forever. Augustus's hand trembled. The blade pressed deeper, drawing a thin line of black blood. Then he looked at Cole, at his son who had just seen compulsion shatter against truth, who had awakened a fortress with nothing but the instinct to protect what mattered. Augustus lowered the blade. "Monsters are made by choices, not by blood," he said, his voice carrying to every witness in the hall. "I choose mercy over vengeance. I choose to prove that power without cruelty is not weakness. It is strength." He turned to the assembled court. "Kurt Valentini is sentenced to eternal imprisonment in the sunken vaults. Let him contemplate in darkness what he tried to destroy in light." Guards moved forward to take Valentini away. The fallen council head didn't struggle. He simply stared at Cole with something that might have been respect or might have been hatred, perhaps both. When the hall had cleared of everyone but family and the closest witnesses, Augustus removed his silver crown and knelt before his son. Not as a king performing a ceremony, but as a man offering something that couldn't be taken, only given. "Will you be my son?" he asked quietly. "Not by fate or prophecy or blood alone, but by choice. Will you choose me as I choose you?" Cole looked at his mother, who nodded through tears. He looked at the portrait above the throne. The woman his mother had been, would be, again. He looked at the ancient hall, filled with the warmth his presence had awakened. "I choose you," Cole said, and his voice didn't waver. "I choose us, all three of us." Augustus pulled him into an embrace that was gentle despite his immortal strength. And high above them, the ancient shutters that had been sealed for 3 centuries cracked open with a sound like ice breaking in spring. The first rays of gentle dawn spilled into Rothenburg Keep, touching stone that had known only darkness, bringing light that didn't burn but blessed. The prophecy had been fulfilled, not through violence or conquest, but through a child brave enough to seek truth, and a king wise enough to choose love over fear. The eastern parapet had been sealed since the day Augustus first took the throne, its windows bricked over to protect the vampire court from the sun's deadly rays. Now, with the fortress guards working quickly under their king's command, those bricks were pried away one by one. Nobles and mortals alike gathered on the wide stone terrace, their ancient divisions forgotten in the face of what they were about to witness. Coley stood between his parents, his small hand clasped in Augustus's pale grip on one side, and Anaya's warm fingers on the other. The horizon was beginning to blush with color, rose and gold spreading across the sky like paint across canvas. "They say it will burn us," one of the older nobles whispered, fear threading through his voice. "The prophecy promised otherwise," Augustus replied. though Cole could feel the slight tremor in his father's hand. 300 years of instinct screamed at him to flee, to hide, to return to the safety of shadow. He stayed. The first direct ray of sunlight broke over the distant mountains and swept across the terrace like a golden wave. It touched Augustus first. He closed his eyes, bracing for agony that had defined his kind since the beginning of time. The light was warm, gentle. It illuminated rather than destroyed, revealing the beauty in his features that shadow had always made stark and cold. Other vampires gasped as the dawn washed over them, bringing sensation they'd believed lost forever. The simple comfort of standing in morning light without fear. Augustus opened his eyes, and they gleamed with tears he hadn't shed in centuries. By the authority granted me by blood and crown, and witnessed by this assembly in dawn's first light, I declare a new age for our kingdom, he proclaimed, his voice strong and clear. We will rule by consent, not compulsion, by cooperation, not conquest. The old divisions between mortal and immortal end here, now, with the rising sun. He placed his hand on Cole's shoulder. This is my son, Cole Dillard, the dawn-born heir. He carries the future in his blood and the courage of both worlds in his heart. The assembled witnesses, vampire lords and mortal representatives, scholars and warriors and common folk who had been summoned to bear witness, knelt as one. Not from fear, but from genuine hope that something broken was finally being made whole. Later, when the ceremonies had concluded and the crowds dispersed, the three of them returned to the great hall. The portrait of Aeneas still hung above the throne, her painted eyes watching them with queenly grace. We could take it down, Augustus offered quietly. Store it away if the memories are too painful. Aeneas shook her head, her fingers intertwined with his. Some things should be remembered, not hidden. That portrait is who I was meant to be, who I'm becoming again. She knelt beside Cole, brushing his hair back from his forehead. Do you know what your name means? Cole? It's from an ancient tongue. It means victorious. I didn't remember choosing it, but some part of me must have known, must have believed we would win somehow. Augustus withdrew the iron compass from his pocket, the one Aeneas had carried for 7 years without understanding why. He placed it in Cole's palm, the metal warm from his touch. True north, Augustus explained. No matter the darkness, no matter how lost you feel, this will always point you home. Cole looked at the compass, then up at the portrait, then out the window where genuine daylight now streamed through glass that had been dark for 3 centuries. His young face was thoughtful, wise beyond his 7 years. Before, you only had her picture, he said softly, pointing first to the portrait, then to the sunrise. Now you have tomorrow, too. The stone walls seemed to exhale, warmth spreading through the fortress like blood returning to cold limbs. Rothenburg Keep, which had been a monument to power and fear, was becoming something it had never been before, a home. The bridge between worlds hadn't been built through prophecy or power or ancient magic. It had been built by a child brave enough to knock on a vampire king's door and courageous enough to ask the one question that changed everything. Why is my mom's photo in your house? Sometimes the right question is all it takes to illuminate the darkness. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. Your time, your attention, and your support truly mean the world to me. I appreciate every single one of you. Now tell me, what do you think happens next in this story? Drop your predictions in the comments. You never know, the next twist might come from your idea. And before you go, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more amazing stories. Let me know where in the world you're watching from too. I love seeing how far this family reaches. Once again, thank you. You're the real reason these stories keep coming to life.